How's it going, everybody? I've been playing quite a bit with VMware's NSX-T data center platform for the past several months, and something that I have spent a lot of time with, and I've gotten actually pretty good at working with. So I wanted to kind of record a kind of more of a free-form video around just how NSX-T works and stuff like that, and then go through some of the cool things that make it do what it does and that type of stuff. And spend a little bit of time going through some of the behind the scenes pieces to it. Now, I do want to record content around NSX-T and how it actually works and do a full on NSXV like series where we start off with the high level details and we get into all the whiz bang wow stuff that makes NSX-T do what it does. I still plan on doing that, but in the meantime, while I'm still working through some of the fundamental pieces, this is basically what I want to go do. So let me go ahead and share my screen real quick. Go back over here to this computer. There we go. So here I'm logged into vCenter, and a couple of the key things that you need to have in play when you're dealing with any type of NSX-like operations. You need vCenter. You need to have all the hosts inside of a cluster, and um, stuff like that. And in order for this to work the way that you need it to, there's some details that need to be laid out. Distributed switches need to be configured and things like that. One key thing that I found out about working with NSX-T that's different than with NSX-V is that when you're working with the platform, with V, you would deal with a VDS, the vSphere distributed switch, and you wouldn't have to worry about anything beyond that because as long as you had a cluster that was tied to a VDS, you were able to get all the communication to work. Well, because V was so tied to vSphere and you literally had to join them together, you could only have one NSX manager to one vCenter instance. So it was a one-to-one mapping. In T, you don't have limitations like that. So you can deploy NSX-T to a non-ESXi workload, to KVM and things like that, Red Hat. So one of the things that is interesting about T and how different it is, I'll go ahead and show you what I'm talking about here. I'll come down here to configure and then the physical adapters. If we come down here and look, go ahead and minimize this down a little bit so it spreads it out a little bit more. What you'll see is I've got a number of VM NICs, right? I've got a total of, what is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So I got 9 VM NICs mapped to this particular host. And I am running ESXi 6.7 Update 3. So, and that is the minimum version of ESXi that I was able to download from VMware's website and get to push the configs to. I had to do a little bit of research through the compatibility guide to figure out which version of ESXi, what the minimum version was in order for this to work. Now, in order to do this, I have a compute VDS or a vSphere distributed switch deployed to these ESXi hosts. So I've got compute 1 and compute 2, and the reason why I've got two different clusters, one with one host, one with three hosts, is because I wanted to be able to test out from this side here, go under fabric, and I go underneath nodes, that when I go to do this and expand this, I have a single host where you have to manually configure the details for everything. Where you have a cluster of 3 hosts, you can apply a transport node profile, which is what I wanted to do in order to get this to work. So once I have these profiles created and everything applied, and underneath the networking tab, you create an IP address pool so you can have a pool of IPs that can be assigned to the TEP or the tunnel endpoints and all that good stuff. After a little bit, if you come over here to TCP/IP configuration, you can see the NSX hyperbus and the NSX overlay that is used for communication on the host level in order to do the Geneva encapsulation and all that good stuff. Well, with that being said, once I was able to get all that working and operational, then you're able to push NSX workloads, the VIBs, the VMware installation bundles, down from NSX Manager down to the ESXi hosts. Now, at this point in time, I am currently using traditional vSphere networking. I was trying to think of the best way to explain that, where I have on my compute VDS, I have a compute distributed port group. And right now, if I look at VMs, I've got one VM. I've got Linux 1. And if I come over here and I was to look at Linux 1, you can see that I got an IP address of 10.1.103. And what I have, in order for this to work, is I have a CSR 1000V running 16.6 code, which 16.6 and newer code, they increase the backplane or the throughput of the router to be a 1 megabit. I know it's a whopping 1 meg, but it allows me to have a virtual top of rack device sitting inside of my NSX environment that allows communication in and out of the environment. Now, I'm not going into a lot of details to how that's set up right now. I will when we get into the actual series, but for right now, I have a CSR 1000V that has a two network adapters. One network adapter is in my home network, so it's able to communicate outbound to the rest of the environment, and then another network adapter that's in a port group that doesn't have any uplinks attached to it. So it's a host-only vSwitch. And by doing that, it allows me to use the CSR 1000V as a jump device between the virtual environment and the rest of my home lab. Now, if I was to pull this up and bring this over, I have Dhcp configured on the router, so show run pipe section Dhcp. And if I do a show IP Dhcp bind, I have two bindings. I have 100.2 and 100.3. As you can see, this particular VM right here, Linux 1, is actually a virtual machine created from a template, and I get the IP address of 10.1.103. Now, right now, if I wanted to log into this guy and go to the internet, I'll be able to do so, which is using non-NSX networking. I'm using straight Vsphere networking. So if I was to click on Launch Web Console, click on OK, give that a second and log in. As you can see up here, I have the network icon is working. So if I was to type in the password and give that a moment or two to log in, now this is nested networking, or nested virtualization, meaning that I have a ESXi host deployed inside of ESXi, so it's a virtual ESXi host, and then I have a VM running on top of that host. So now that we're logged in, I did deploy VMware tools on this VM, so that's working the way that you would expect it to. So if I right click in here and go to Open Terminal, and if I was to, let's ping an IP address that's on my local network, this is going to be the IP address of the default gateway for my home network, and I can ping 10.255.1.1. I'm also going to ping Google. Google should be responding. Google is responding. I also have DNS set up, so let's see if this will respond as well. And I'm not sure if that will respond or not. Oh, and it does take a couple seconds, but the Chicago-based ORD is Chicago. So that's showing up. So that's responding to my ping requests, which tells me that traffic is flowing through my network. I won't be able to do a trace route because that's a package that you have to install. So I could do an apt-get and pull down the bits to do a trace route, but you get the point. It is working. It took a couple minutes or a couple seconds for it to work, but at the end of the day, it did its job, which means this particular virtual machine has access to the internet from my home lab. So with that being said, it's a pretty cool feature set, pretty cool capability, all that good stuff that goes along with that. Now, this is, again, this is traditional vSphere networking, right? This is nothing different than if you were studying for your data center virtualization exams and you deployed a distributed switch, you created a port group, and then you map a VM VNIC to that port group, and I'll show you exactly where that would come into play. If I come over here and I was to click on Actions and then go to Edit Settings, you'll see right here in the network adapter section it says Comp Data. That's the particular port group that it's mapped to. Now, in order to transition over to NSX networking, there's a couple different ways that you can do that. You can tie it to a VLAN backed segment, which means that there's a VLAN ID associated to this guy, which you can do both VLAN and overlay based segments, where if I'm doing a VLAN based segment, typically means that I want to take advantage of some sort of NSX capability, but I don't have an edge device deployed in my environment to do inter-segment routing. Where, for example, if I want to just take advantage of, say, network introspection, or I wanted to take care of endpoint protection, if I wanted to do microsegmentation at the VM level inside of a VLAN, but I wanted my default gateway to sit on my home network or on a top of rack switch like I do right here. If I was to pull this up, my default gateway is sitting right here. This is the default gateway for that Linux 1. This happens to be the CSR 1000V. And that is sitting outside of the ESXi environment. So I basically have that deployed, and if I was to do a show IP route, I have this router has an OSPF adjacency with my core switch in my home lab. It's a 3750X. So all that's working the way that it should be. Well, with that being said, that makes the job up to this point easy. Now, if I wanted to, I could create a segment inside of NSX and create, say, VLAN 101 or whatever I want to choose, to be honest with you. And then I could map the NSX segment, or I should say, create the NSX segment. It'll get pushed down to vSphere. And then I move the the VM's VNIC from the comp data network over to the NSX segment. And then I would be able to get that configuration rolled out and take advantage of the use case. So if I was to come over here to this guy and underneath the networking tab, click on segments. Segment in NSX-T is the same thing as a logical switch in NSX-V. So I'm going to click on add segment, and in here I'm just going to call this NSX-T dash VLAN 10. Actually, let's do VLAN 200, and we're going to, you can put in any value you want, and we'll just put that NSX-T VLAN 200, and I'll put in here data. I'm not going to connect it to any gateways right now because, well, there are none. I'm going to configure, map it to the NSX VLAN transport zone. And then the IP address for this guy, I technically don't have to give it anything because there's not going to be anything for me to worry about. I will come in here and specify the VLAN ID, which is 200. I'm going to click outside of it, and then 200 will pop up in there. And then that's all I'm going to have to do. I'm going to go ahead and click on Save. It's going to ask me if there's anything more that I want to do, and there really isn't. I'm going to click on No. And then I'm going to go ahead and, now that that's been created, I'm going to come back over here. I'm going to go click on the networking tab, and then you can see right down here, sometimes it'll show you, yeah, it didn't want to show me. I'll create the segment real quick just so you guys can see what this looks like. NSX-T VLAN 201 data 2. Transport zone is going to be VLAN, it'll be 201. Sometimes it'll tell you down here when it pops up. Okay, and then we see it just pop up right there. Nothing, there was no notification from anything popping in to let me know that it had done. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm actually going to go back and delete that segment. I'm going to go click on this guy here and just click on delete. Delete there, and then go back here. and then 201 after a moment or so should delete itself, and we should be in good shape momentarily once it disappears. We may have to refresh it, but oh, and the API call went out, and then 201 is now gone. So what I get to go do now is I can do a couple things. I can go ahead and right click here, and I can say migrate VMs to another network, which is what they refer to as a bulk migration. If I had a bunch of VMs and I needed to move all their VNICs from one port group over to a different port group, that's how I would do that. But since I only have one host, or I should say one virtual machine, I'm going to right click on here. I'm going to go to Edit Settings. And in the drop down here, I'm going to click this guy and go to Browse. And then in here, I'm going to click on NSX-T VLAN 200 data. And you can tell the icon is different, right? It's not this weird looking switch that has a globe on it, which tells you that it's a distributed switch. This is an NSX-T segment. So I'm going to click on that and click on OK. Now, before I click OK, let me bring this back over here, and let me go create a IP or a DHCP pool real quick. I'm going to type in IP DHCP pool. Is going to be called VLAN 200. The network is going to be 10.1.200.0/24. The default router will be 10.1.200.1. DNS server will be quad 8. And I'm going to come in here and type in IP DHCP excluded range address is going to be 10.1.200.1. And then interface VLAN 200 not interface VLAN, interface gig 2.200, encapsulation .1q 200. IP address here will be 10.1.200.1/24. And I'm going to specify the IP OSPF 1 area 0. And then that should come online. That's there. So now I'm going to go ahead and click OK. That's going to move it to a different segment. Now, when I do this, and I've got it moved to this other segment, I'm going to come back over here, NSX, and then I'm going to refresh this. And after a moment, you can see the segment is gone. This port's information right here will get updated. It'll go from a 0 to a 1. And I honestly don't know how long that takes. It could take a couple minutes. Usually it's pretty quick, but there we have it. So looks like it's going to take a moment. Now if I come back over here to Linux and I log back into this guy, and I do an ifconfig, you can see, and I got a new IP address, 10.1.200.2. If I come back over here to NSX, it's got a new IP address, right? We can see that, and if we click back over here on this guy, we do show IP DHCP bind, we can see that that particular VM has a 200.2 IP address. And for whatever reason, it's not updating here, and I'm not sure why. Let's go Tier 1 Gateway. Kind of unusual that it's not popping up, because normally once you would have it added, it would show up, but that's okay. I'm not going to worry about that right now. So now we come back over here to Linux 1 with the new IP address, and I do those same pings again. I can ping out. And if I go to google.com, Google also responds. And the bottom line here is now we're using NSX-T for communication, where we're using distributed switch in the previous one. Is there any difference between the two? There is. One is specific to Vsphere, the other one is specific to NSX. Now the benefit to this one, though, if I come back over here, let's refresh this to see if it shows up. Yeah, it's not. Maybe an overlay thing. I'm not exactly sure why it's not showing up. If I wanted to take this a step further, I could start limiting what can be done. So for example, at the distributed firewall level, I could go in here and put in a block policy to where I don't want to allow ICMP. Like I could block ping if I wanted to. So I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but this is one of the reasons why you'll see NSX-T being deployed in an environment. So if I was to come in here and go add policy, and I'm going to go click in here and just type in test DFW rule, and then click in here and go to add rule, and then underneath this rule, the rule is going to be block ICMP. I'm going to say the source is going to be, and I can put whatever I want in here. I can come in and specify a source address. I can specify anything that I want, really. But what I'm actually going to go ahead and do is services. Click on this guy, and it's going to ask you for what service you want to block. So you can come in here and just do ICMP. Is it ping? Why is that not? ICMP echo. So I'm going to do an echo request. I'm going to go take this guy and this guy. I'm going to say apply. And then I'm going to drop. Or I could reject it too. And then I'm going to go ahead and publish. So now, with that rule being applied, I should not be able to ping outbound. So we go back over here and hit the up arrow. It says it's not allowing the ping to go out. Same thing with this guy, right? It's able to still resolve DNS, but it's not able to actually ping outbound. So if I go back over here to, move this out of the way, come back over here and I go to drop and then publish. As you can see, it goes by pretty quick. Come back over here and do the same thing again, right? You get a different result where drop is just a silent drop, where reject is a defined, hey, you're being blocked. And there we go. Now I can go, and as you can see that there was, that's working. So I'm going to go take this one step further. I'm going to say allow the ping, right? We're going to publish that just to make sure that it's working. We're going to allow the ping. So now the ping is working again. We'll do the DNS lookup, and now that's the next thing I'm going to block. So you want to put the more specific matches on top, right? So in this case here, we're not being any super specific. So I'm going to add in another rule. I'm going to say add rule, and this new rule is going to be block DNS. And the service that I'm going to be blocking will be DNS. So I'll choose this guy and this guy just to make sure I'm covering all my bases. Click on apply. So I'm going to say reject and then publish. So I'm blocking DNS on one, but I'm allowing ping on the other. So if I go back over here to this guy, I have my ping is working just fine with the regular ping, but if I go back to this guy, my DNS lookup is being dropped. So you can't even resolve the IP address from Google because you're blocking the DNS lookup. So this is where you would take advantage of NSX-T without having to deploy a distributed router, a tier 1 or a tier 0 gateway, an edge VM, or any of that other stuff. You can simply push an NSX segment down to your ESXi hosts and then start using the more advanced features. So there's other things you can do inside of here. You can do distributed IDS, you can do endpoint protection, you can do network introspection. Now one of the things that I'm planning on doing as I go along, and I'm actually going to go ahead and click on this guy right here, and I'm going to delete policy and then publish. So now it's free and clear again. I'm going to go back over here to Linux 1. I'm going to ping it again. That's working. I'm going to go back to this guy, and that's working again. The firewall rules are gone. One of the things that I'm planning on doing is after I have this stuff deployed and working, and I have everything operational the way that I want it to, I'm going to take it a step further. and I'm going to show you guys how to work with it when you've got a VDI or virtual desktop infrastructure deployed with Horizon. So that's one of the other things that I really think is cool about working with the VMware platform, is the ability of playing around with all the cool stuff that comes with it. So that's basically what I'm doing. So this is just to give a quick demo of how you could play around with all this stuff. Let me jump back over here to networking and then the segments and see if it shows up now. Yeah, see now it shows up, right? The ports just took forever for it to update. Now if I click on this guy, it's going to tell me that Linux 1, and this is the segment port, and then this is the segment itself. Meaning that I have a segment ID, right? And then I am attached to this, so this is the segment ID. Now if I was to log into the ESXi host and run NSX commands, and that is not something that I have mastered yet. I have no problem logging in to the Edge VM, but the Edge VM doesn't have anything deployed to it yet. So I haven't mapped any segments to the Edge VM, and I do have an Edge VM deployed just because I wanted to play around with that and get it working. So these are all things that we will be taking a look at and testing at a later point in time. But the bottom line here, ladies and gentlemen, is this is really what NSX-T's job is to do. It's to be able to give you that deep insider understanding of what's going on in your environment without having to be too invasive, because not everybody likes the idea of totally relying on virtual networking in order to get the job done. But there's a lot of cool features that you can play with when it comes to how NSX works and all that good stuff that goes along with that. With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you guys so much for stopping by and hanging out, and I will catch all of you in the next video.